Okay, so let's look at how we implement some different authentication strategies. Here's the tutorial sheet I've got open, part one. And what I'm going to suggest is, obviously everybody's busy working on their assignment at the moment as well, and I would like you to be extremely careful when you're working your virtual machine that you don't interfere with your Grails environment. I don't want you to struggle with your assignment because you're doing this work. So what I suggest you do is to set up a completely different user on your in your virtual machine instance, so that we can do this assignment and then you're sure it's completely separate and won't interfere with anything. Please be careful, alright? It's on your head to make sure that all this is safe, but what I'm going to do is talk you through doing it this way to make sure that you're completely separate and completely insulated, so your tutorial work is separate to your coursework. So what I suggest you do is you use the sudo command to become root, which is what I've got there, and you can add a user called auth test. So I'll say add user auth test, and it comes back and asks us for a password. So you set it to be whatever you want. I've set it to auth test so that it won't be forgotten. That creates a user called auth test to us. What I suggest you do is you log out now and then you log back into the main front page of your Debian install. You log in as auth test and then you'll be clear. Because obviously I'm recording, that's difficult, so I'm just going to switch users to auth test. Okay, so there's my auth test user. Just as a sign of how quickly things move on, we've used apt to install Grails and a number of other components over the years, but this past few months people have started identifying difficulties with running multiple instances of Grails, because sometimes you have applications using different versions and you need to be able to very easily switch your development environments. And the current wisdom this year is that apt as a means of managing Grails installations is possibly not the best way of doing it. And the current best practice is to use something called GVM tool, which is Grails version manager, and it lets you very easily switch between versions, which is quite useful if you've got applications deployed against different versions. So I've put the commands in here to install Grails under your auth test. So if you just paste that curl command in there, which gets a bash script and executes it, and then we execute this script here, and then we can say GVM install Grails. So we'll execute that. Okay, and this is downloading and installing the latest Grails. So doing it this way in the auth test user will keep it completely separate to any other coursework you're doing. You don't want to execute this using the same user account that you're using for your ordinary coursework. So here we've got a prompt asking us if we want this to be the default. Yes, we do. So that's installed Grails in our auth test user. So we've got a clean environment that we can use to do this tutorial with, basically. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new app called auth test. So just cut and paste between the notes document and my environment. Okay, so that's created it, and then we cd into auth test. There's our application root. I've put so here are some plugins, and these plugins basically enable the sorts of authentication that we're talking about. Specifically, Spring Security Core sets up all the basic authentication systems that we need. So it's downloading its plugins now. Just a warning that install plugin is going to be deprecated soon, but it's still there for now, so we'll use it. So you can see downloading all the dependencies. Now, when that is finished, we've got a message saying please run this s2 quit start task. So when we have user and group information stored in the local database, we're going to need domain classes to store user information and role information, and this command s2l9-quickstart is what Grails is going to use to set those up for us. But before we do that, there are a few other components that we're going to pull in. So Spring Security UI gives us a user interface for managing users and groups and roles. And mail is used, obviously, if you forget your password, you need to send yourself an email to remind yourself of your password, and some other plugins that are used, which are dependencies basically of Spring Security UI. So I'm just going to grab all those and paste them over there. So building web applications using frameworks like this, this is the usual startup procedure. Figure out which plugins you're going to use and then install them into your development stack. So that's what we're doing now. We're just saying we've got an empty Grails application and we're going to install some plugins into it which are going to help us with the tasks that we need to perform, in this case authentication. So obviously the plugin install time will get less as we install different plugins. Because this is a fresh user, the plugins are stored on a per user basis, so we'll build up a cache of plugins basically, and it'll become quicker as we go. That's the last one. Okay, so we've got all our dependencies now. We've got an empty application with some dependencies installed, some plugins installed. I'm going to clear that screen. So the next step is to run this s2l9-quickstart command, which is a command provided by the Spring Security Core plugin. And if I just paste that in there, what this is saying is please set up the authentication system for me, and the package where I want my domain classes stored is called auth-test, and the domain class I want to use to store my user information is user, and the domain class I want to store my role information is role. We'll execute that. Okay, so we get a message back saying created domain classes, controllers and GSPs. It tells us that it's updated our Grails app config file with some, so let's have a quick look in there and just show you what it's added, just in case you're sufficiently interested. The main thing that it's done is to add these three settings down at the bottom, which says the user domain class name is auth-test.user, the role is this, and the authority is this. So that's good. We'll have a quick look in the domain class. So auth-test and then user. And the only thing, so this is a domain class, you've seen many of these now. The only thing that I want to point out to you that's slightly different is we're going to set up some users and passwords in a little while, and obviously usernames and passwords. The one thing we really don't want is to store password text in the database. That's incredibly bad practice. And so one of the things you'll notice about this domain class is it has a password field. This domain class has some constraints, you're used to those. It has some mappings, you're used to those. Some other utility methods here. But what it's got that you might not have seen before are these before insert, before update methods, and these are like database triggers. So a database trigger is something that's fired on insert or after insert or before update, common trigger names. If you've been working in Oracle, you might have worked with database triggers. These methods are fired at particular times in the domain object lifecycle, and obviously before insert is called before a row is inserted, and before update is called shortly before a row is updated. In fact, it's the last thing to happen before the update happens. And what we're doing here is before a row is inserted or before it's updated, we call this method called encode password, and what encode password does is to call a security service which is declared here. So this transient keyword tells the domain class that the variable it's declaring isn't actually a field of the domain class, it's a transient property of the class, so it's not stored in the database. And when this object is created, that gets injected with this particular service bean, which is a Spring Security service. So before we insert or update, we call encode password, and what encode password does is to take the plain text password, which we might have been asked to save, so admin for example, and encode it using some sort of a checksum, so that what we're storing in the database isn't a plain text password. We're not actually even storing an encrypted version of the password. What we're storing is the string which is the result of encoding something called a salt with the password. And the reason we do that is whenever somebody tries to log in, we repeat that procedure against their password, and if the result of that procedure is the same as the thing we have in the database, then we consider that to be a successful login. But what gets stored in the database isn't even close to the password that the user has. It's an encrypted version of a string that's been encrypted using the password. So it's still unique, but you can never get back to the password from what's stored in the database, which is a good thing for security of our users. I've gone on about that a little bit. It's a level of detail beyond you need, but it might be useful to you. So we've created an application, we've installed some plugins, and we've run a quick start method which has set up some domain classes for users and roles and a bit of config. Our application actually needs to do something useful, so what I've said is this app's going to store secrets, which are just strings. So here we've got a create domain class command, you're all familiar with this, and this creates a domain class called secret in the auth test package. Let's run that. Okay, so we can see that we created secret domain class, and we created some unit tests for it as well. We scroll down here, so the next page. We better make secret actually do something, because obviously right now it's an empty domain class. That's not very good. And I've put a potential implementation in here, so I've put a string secret text and a mapping that makes it into text. So let's just insert that. Okay, so that's made our secret domain class have one property, which is secret text. The point of this application is to demonstrate security, and we want a front page, which is an index.jsp that isn't secured, but then we'd like to secure all the actions on this secret object. So we need to generate the scaffold, so we've got some user interface. So let's run Grails generate all on auth-test.secret. So this is going to generate a user interface for managing these secrets and creating them. As you're going through this, if you want to do a Grails run app at this point, just to see the app, then feel free. I'm confident this will work. Famous last words. So I'm just going to plow on. If you want to pause it now and do a run app, then that's entirely up to you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the controllers. So it's generated me a controller called secret controller, which is obviously what the scaffold has generated. So you've seen all this before, right? We've got our index and our list methods here. This is where we're going to tell Grails that these actions, the index and list and creating secrets, is actually a secured action. We don't want any user to be able to do this. So whilst we might want any user to be able to see the home page, you have to be logged in order to see any of these actions executed. And the way we're going to do that is we import this class, Grails plugin Spring Security Secured. So there are many plugins and many frameworks for doing security. We just happen to be using Spring Security here, which is one of the better known Java security libraries. This thing, Grails plugin Spring Security Secured, is something called an annotation. And we use annotations on methods of ways of supplying extra information. So in the same way that we have those statics in the domain classes, annotations are another way of providing class level metadata, if you like. And what we do here is, yeah, good. So we've imported the secured annotation. Don't know why that shouldn't be there, sorry. We've done the generate all. So I'm in my secret controller now, and I've added this this import. You can see here, that's the import. And what I do is I use this annotation using an @ syntax before a method. So before my index method, I say secured, and then some parameters, and the parameters are role admin and is authenticated fully. So what this is saying is the index action is a secured action, which means you have to log in to be able to see it. And once you've logged in, so that's authentication. Once you've logged in order to be authorized to see this, you must be in the administrative role and you must be fully authenticated, which means you can't be using a cookie that's left over from before, if you like. You must be newly authenticated to use this. So we're using the secured annotation to flag this particular action in this controller as being secured. You need to log in and you need to have the role administrator to be able to do this. The is authenticated fully thing is again a level of detail, but it's just to stop people using leftover credentials basically. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add that secured annotation to all of my actions in this controller, which means that anything you're going to do with one of these secrets, you need to be authenticated. You can't view one, you can't list one, you can't create one unless you've logged in. So that's good. That's what we've done there. And the final thing we need to do, so we've created an app, we've installed some plugins, we've set up the configuration to use our user and role class, domain classes for user information. And we've secured our controller methods so that the actions within them are secured. We know that we need to log in to use them. Now we need a user to be able to log in as. As it happens, Spring Security will create a registration form for us. But those users will be ordinary users, and we've said you have to have the administrative role to be able to see all the actions of the secret controller. Excuse me. So what I want to do is I want to set up an administrative role and an administrative user. Now, even when you're going to be using things like Facebook login, the odds are you're still going to want to be able to log in as a local admin user, and it's very common to have, even though you might be using one of the delegated authentication mechanisms that we discussed in the lecture, you're still going to want to have some kind of local administrative system. So it's purely under your control, because obviously if Facebook removes your account and you're the only administrator in your system, you're left with no way of logging in. So that's not ideal. So for administrative tasks, it still makes a lot of sense to have local users. For sort of social web users, by all means use delegated authentication, but it's still nice to have a local administrative account. So this last section here talks about editing the bootstrap. And here's an empty bootstrap. You've seen these before, right? And what I've done is I'll just paste this in. I've added these lines. So paste those in. And I also added at the top import auth test. So this is importing all our domain classes basically, role and user. Let's just tidy this up a little bit, and then I'll talk you through it. So what we've got is our init method, and we've said, right, firstly see if there's an administrative role. Try and find a role called role admin. If you don't find one, then create a new one and save it. So this is where our role admin comes from, and that's the thing we referenced in our annotation. Next thing we do is we say, try and find a user called admin, and if you can't find one, then create one. We set password to admin, but remember there was that little before insert and before update trigger, so what gets stored in the database won't be admin but will be an encrypted string, so that's a good thing. And we've said that user is enabled, that's good. And the last thing we do is to say, if the admin user doesn't already have the admin role, then make sure you give the admin user the admin role. So after this bootstrap executes, then we'll have an admin user with the password admin, although a different string will be stored in the database, and that user will be a member of the admin role. Just as an aside, if you're going to be using something like GitHub to store your source code, this is obviously not great because I've just advertised to the world that my admin password is admin. What I tend to do, if I just show you some real code, what I do is here's a section of code in a real applications bootstrap, and what it's doing is it's looking to the Grails applications configuration file for a list of users, and for each user that's defined there, creating that user with the password. So I never actually store usernames or passwords in the source code, which gets checked into GitHub. And then what that means I can have is in my local file system, in my configuration file, I just have a list of users. Now I can show you this because on my local development box at home I have username admin, password admin, and I have a version of this configuration file on production servers where these are set to two very different things which are entirely private. And you can see I've also got things like to do Facebook login. Here are the Facebook secrets to be able to do Facebook login, and Google AdSense analytics codes and things like that. So I never actually store in GitHub the kinds of configuration that would give away secret information or what should be very private information. So just bear in mind that although we are using Bootstrap to set up users, for production systems and production code you need to be a little bit more careful, not hard code usernames and passwords in them. Delegate them or externalize them into configuration files. But that's a side note. So we've done it. We have created a new app, installed some plugins, set up the user and the role domain objects. We've then created a domain object of our own, which is going to be a secured thing called secret. We've generated the scaffolds. There it is, generate all. So that's generated a user interface for our secret domain object. And then we've updated the generated controller to mark all the methods in there as secured, which means that they need to be authenticated. So I think the time has come. One thing that before we run it as well that I should point out, if you remember when you set up your assignment, we did a lot of work with the data source to set up a local MySQL database. So if we go Grails app config data source, you'll see that because we're doing development, we're actually using what's called a H2 database, which is an in-memory database. So whenever we run this application, we're using an in-memory database that won't be saved. So each time we run it, it gets cleared down and recreated. So there are no persistent changes here, and I'm not going to mess about turning this into a MySQL database since we're here really to look at authentication. So all that said, we do a Grails run app. Moment of truth. It compiles our application. Okay, and it says server's running. So this is what I had running before when I was doing the slides. Okay, so this is our application front page. You can see all the controllers, login controller, logout controller. Here's our secret controller. All these other controllers are Spring Security UI things, and they allow us to do things like register new users. So there's a register controller there. Now, this form is created using a template, so you can change this to fit in with the look and feel of your application. Didn't realise I did that. So what you've got here is a scaffolded authentication framework where users can sign up for local accounts. If you were using something like Bootstrap or Facebook or Google to do your authentication, then you wouldn't be using this, because obviously users will be or you'd be encouraging users to authenticate using third-party services. But just to show you, these are all here, and you can make it so that administrators can only see these things, and you can see that there are ways of editing users and changing their permissions. So there's a whole administrative UI here for users that's been generated for us, but we're interested in the details. Here's our secret controller, which has been generated by the scaffold generate all command, and this is the controller that we use to secure all the methods. So when I click on this, hopefully I'll be presented with a login form. Oh, there it is. There's our login form. And again, this is actually provided by Spring Security UI. So this is a template which we can rip out and we can change the look and feel so it matches our application. My username was admin, my password was admin. I log in. Okay, and then I've got through to the secret page. I can create a new secret. This secret. Create it. Let's do another one. Create home. Oh, didn't mean to do home there, sorry. So because I'm now logged in, I've got a cookie, I can go back in, and it knows that it's logged in as me. I'm not presented with a second authentication challenge. Here you can see this is a secret, another one we can go in there. We click home. What we could do, of course, is we could go to the logout controller. I'll click on that. There's no visible sign that we've logged out, so one of the things, if you're interested in this, Grails provides some tag libs, so there's a G security tag lib that you can use in your GSPs to find out whether a user's logged in or not. So there's an is logged in tag, I think, and that's how you can present sections at the top that say welcome back username and all those sorts of things, but that's for you to look into if you're interested. Since I clicked the logout controller, when I go back to there now, it's prompted me to log in again, so resupply my credentials. There we go. So that's implemented authentication, form-based authentication. I think I'll stop that screencast now, and then the next one I'll do basic authentication. We'll create some kind of an API that we need to talk to. Okie dokie. So if you want to have a go at that, test it out along the way, test some different things, see what happens when you log in with an invalid password, create yourself 2 accounts maybe with different usernames and passwords, somebody without the admin role. Just play with it generally, and then we can move on to the next part. Okay.